have some pretty amazing music to play for you as we warm up this beautiful, beautiful day. Some of you are going to think that it's a little weird.
Let our circle be strong and full of medicine. Hear me. This is my prayer song that I'm singing for you. This is my promise song that is taking me to the edge.
This is my dream song I am singing to you.
The singing water.
The singing water, the talking trees. I am dancing underneath you all. Now I want you to listen to that. As I begin today's lesson, what do you think that is? What would you do? How would you feel if I told you that that is actually crickets slowed down, tapped in with a Native American opera singer? What if I were to tell you that that's what crickets sound like, slowed down? You know, sometimes I am overwhelmed at the way in which the world introduces itself to me and the way that things become more obvious once somebody points it out to me. Good morning, John O'Keefe here. It is about a minute and a half until we begin. And I was thinking a whole bunch about our experience yesterday as readers. I was thinking a whole bunch about how Etienne, the young native boy who is 14 years old, is learning English from a 12-year-old, 13-year-old European boy named Matt. And one of the things that I've noticed is that Sackness, grandfather to Etienne, stated very clearly how important it was for Native Americans to learn how to read English so that they could protect themselves and protect their way of life from the colonists, the European colonists who moved into the area. And I was thinking about a couple friends of ours who are on our time, who are on our experience, on our reading, specifically Jay. Hope you're here today. And how earlier this school year, he gave me permission to share this. He was not much of a reader. He didn't read. He was really smart and was able to kind of get away with not reading for a really long time until he met me. And I said, just like I felt when I was his age, that I needed to learn how to read, that I needed to learn how to get better at this because I was super capable. And I remember acting like I couldn't do it. I can't read. That those kind of books aren't very good, or these kinds of things aren't very good, or I'm not very good at something. And usually it has been because of the fact that either I hadn't tried, or that I wasn't interested, or that I was not given the opportunity to kind of be taught at the right time. And so what I want to say is Etienne right now has this very hard feeling about his life, especially as it relates to white people, European people. And so as we get going in our work today, I want to pay close attention to maybe trying to find out why. But also another question that I'm having right now is, what is Etienne good at? What are some of his strengths? Because right now, what he's being asked to do is look stupid or look like he doesn't know something. And so he does not like to be put into that position. Matt, on the other hand, doesn't really like to have to try to force somebody to teach or to learn something. I know how that feels because I'm a teacher. Sometimes there's kids in my classroom who aren't very interested in learning. And so as we begin this adventure today, what I would love for you to understand is that we all have things that we are good at. We all have things that we don't like. We all have things that we don't like that other people do like. And sometimes they look at us and say, you should try it. And our stubbornness, our attitude says, no, I'm not going to learn anything. And I think that that's one of those things that Etienne is struggling with right now, is that he doesn't want to learn from Matt, period. You know what I'm saying? And he doesn't want to have to be learning English. And my big question right now is why? So, ladies and gentlemen, couple things. If you happen to try to skip across things, you're not going to get away from me on this. Before we begin today, I want to remind you that we've got a native word page. And this is my glossary for Native American words that come up as we read. We've got 3 so far. Nada. I don't know if I'm saying it right. It's the best I can do, considering I don't know Penobscot. Nada, no. Nequenis, grandson. Seba, tomorrow. And it was really fun because yesterday, Mag, on her walk out, she said, see you, Seba. And I thought that that was really wonderful. So thank you, Mag. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let us get started on this beautiful Friday. We are in a position where Matt is trying to teach Etienne how to learn the letters of the alphabet in the English language, as well as kind of teaching him one of the stories that he knows. And the story that he's trying to tell is this shipwreck story. And Etienne, at the very end of last time we read, said how much he wasn't impressed, how many things that the white person needed in order to be dependent or to be safe and secure. He said Native Americans, Indians, would just take care of these kinds of things in their own space. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, chapter 9. I'm going to knock on the window. And we've got a reader, Miss Jen. She's going to be our HVAC lady. She's going to be coming in. So, chapter 9. A few mornings later, at the end of the lesson, Matt delayed Etienne. How'd you kill that rabbit? He asked, pointing to the offering Etienne had thrown on the table that day. There's no bullet hole in it. Indian not use bullet for rabbit, Etienne answered scornfully. Then how? There's no hole at all. For a moment, it seemed that Etienne would not bother to answer. Then the Indian shrugged. Etienne show, he said. Come. Matt was dumbfounded. It was the first sign the Indian had given of what exactly? He had not sounded friendly, but there was no time to puzzle this out right now. Etienne was walking across the clearing, and he apparently expected Matt to follow. Pleased and curious, Matt hobbled after him, grateful that he no longer needed a crutch. Time has passed. You see that? He doesn't need the crutch anymore, and that's how the author has given us the information. At the edge of the clearing, the Indian stopped and searched the ground. Presently, he stooped down under a black spruce tree. It's kind of a pine tree. Poked into the dirt and jerked up a long, snake-like root. He drew from the leather pouch at his belt a curious sort of knife. The blade curved into a hook. With one sure stroke, he split one end of the root, then peeled off the bark by pulling at it with his teeth. He separated the whole length into 2 strands, which he spliced together by rolling them against his bare thigh. Next, he searched about in the bushes till he found 2 forked saplings about 3 feet apart. He trimmed the twigs from these, drawing his knife toward his chest as Matt had been taught not to do. Then he cut a stout branch and rested it lightly across the forks of the saplings. From the thread-like root, he made a noose and suspended it from the stick so that it hung just above the ground. He worked without speaking, and it seemed to Matt that all this took him no time at all. So, one of the things that's pretty cool is sometimes when I hear something like that, I reread it and I draw a picture. You know, like I'm trying to put a little bit of a picture to what I'm seeing. So basically, he took a snake-like root out of the ground, which roots are kind of tough. They're going to be kind of rough. And then he took a knife and he started slicing it and he started peeling off the bark so that he has just this kind of long, almost like string. And then he pulled it apart and then weaved it together so that it became a rope. And then he found 2 saplings that had forks on the top of it. And then he strung a stick across it and then dangled this piece down and made a little bit of a loop. So now there's a little bit of a loop on these 2 saplings. And it's all coming together. And now, what was he showing him? how to go hunt for a rabbit. You could try this right afterwards. You could use these words and try to do it yourself. Rabbit run into trap, Etienne said finally. Pull stick into bush so white boy can kill. Golly, said Matt, filled with admiration. I hadn't thought of making a snare. Now I know the word snare. Snare is the kind of trap that Etienne has just made. I didn't know you could make one without string or wire. Make more, Etienne ordered, pointing into the woods, not too close. After Etienne had gone that day, Matt managed to make 2 more snares. They were clumsy little things, and he was not too proud of them. Splitting a slippery root, he discovered, was not as easy as it had looked. He spoiled a number of them before he mastered the trick of splicing them together. They did not slide as easy as the one Etienne had made, but they seemed strong enough. Next morning, he showed his traps to Etienne. He had hoped for some sign of approval, but all he got was a grunt and a shrug. He knew that to Etienne his work must look childish. However, on the 3rd day, one of his own snares had been upset, though the animal had got away. The day after that, to his joy, there was actually a partridge struggling to free itself in the bushes where the stick had caught. This time, the grunt with which Etienne rewarded him sounded very much like his grandfather's good. Silently, the Indian watched as Matt reset the snare. Then they walked back to the cabin. Matt swung his catch as nonchalantly as he had seen Etienne do. So he's kind of following Etienne, like, look at what I got. Look, I got a partridge. A little bird, right? You don't need to bring me any more food, he boasted. I'll catch my own meat from now on. Nevertheless, Etienne continued to bring him some offering every morning. Not always fresh meat. He seemed to know exactly when Matt had finished the last scrap of rabbit or duck. Sometimes he brought a slab of corn cake, or a pouch full of nuts. Once a small cake of maple sugar. Plainly, he felt bound to keep the terms of his grandfather's agreement. Matt stuck to his part of the bargain as well, though the lessons were an ordeal for them both. Matt knew well enough what a poor teacher he was. Sometimes it seemed that Etienne was learning in spite of him. Once the Indian had resigned himself to mastering 26 letters. He took them in a gulp, scorning the childish candle and door and table that Matt had devised. Soon he was spelling out simple words. The real trouble was that Etienne was contemptuous, that the whole matter of white man's words seemed to him nonsense. Impatiently, they hurried through the lessons to get on with Robinson Crusoe. Do you get it? Get me through the lesson so I can just listen to you read me a story. Sound familiar? Sounds familiar to me. Matt suspected that the only reason Etienne agreed to come back day after day was that he wanted to hear more of the story of Robinson Crusoe. Skipping over the pages that sounded like sermons, Matt chose the sections he liked best himself. Now he came to the rescue of the man Friday. Etienne sat quietly, and Matt almost forgot him in his own enjoyment of the favorite scene that he was reading. I want to stop for a second. The word Friday can kind of get some of my kids confused whenever we've read this before. So what I want to tell you is that there is a man by the name of Friday in or on the island that Robinson Crusoe's on. His name is Friday, or at least that's what maybe Robinson ends up calling him. But what I'll say is this story is going to be an introduction to a new situation. I'll be very interested to see what ends up happening. There was the mysterious footprint on the sand, the canoes drawn up on the lonely beach, and the strange, wild-looking men with 2 captives. One of the captives they mercilessly slaughtered, killed. The fire was set blazing for a cannibal feast. Cannibal. That's one of the old kind of myths and legends. There was some truth to it, but cannibalism is the idea that when you have a human that you have hunted or killed, that you are now going to eat it. Then the second captive made a desperate escape, running straight to where Crusoe stood watching. 2 savages pursued him with horrid yells. Matt glanced up from the book and saw that Etienne's eyes were gleaming. He hurried on. No need to skip here. Crusoe struck a mighty blow at the first cannibal, knocking him senseless. Then, seeing that the other was fitting an arrow into his bow, he shot and killed him. Matt read on. Now, the book itself goes into skinnier writing. Look at this. You see how I've been reading up here, and now it's getting smaller and it's kind of squiggly. That tells me that Matt is actually, we're getting real words from the real story, Robinson Crusoe. The poor savage who fled, but had stopped, though he saw both his enemies had fallen, yet was so frightened with the noise and fire of my piece, my gun, that he stood stock still, and neither came forward nor went backward. I hallooed again to him, and made signs to him to come forward, which he easily understood, and came a little way, then stopped again. He stood trembling as if he had been taken prisoner, and just been to be killed, as his two enemies were. I beckoned to him again to come to me, and gave him all the signs of encouragement that I could think of. And he came nearer and nearer, kneeling down every 10 or 12 steps in token of acknowledgement for saving his life. I smiled at him, and he looked pleasant, and beckoned him to come still closer. At length, he came close to me, and then he did something strange. He kneeled down again, kissed the ground, put his head on the ground, and took my foot and set it upon his head. This, it seemed, was a token of swearing to be my slave forever. Do you understand this? So remember, we're talking about how Friday was saved by Robinson Crusoe. So there were two men trying to kill him. And then, now, in thanks, he comes back very humbly, lays his head down on the ground, and asks Robinson Crusoe to put his foot on his head, showing, he has all the power, right? That he is now indebted to him, that he owes his life to him. Etienne, at this moment, sprang to his feet, a thundercloud wiping out all the pleasure from his face. "Nada!" he shouted. "Not so!" Matt stopped, bewildered. "Him never do that." "Never do what?" "Never kneel down to white man." But Crusoe had saved his life. "Not kneel down," Etienne repeated fiercely. "Not be slave. Better to die." Matt opened his mouth to protest, but Etienne gave him no chance. In 3 steps, Etienne was out of the cabin. Pause. How did Etienne respond to Friday putting Robinson Crusoe's foot on his head? Very negatively. He said, it would be better, what did he say? Never kneel down to white man. Not kneel down, not be slave, better die. So he's saying that he would rather die than give his life up to be a slave of the white man. And I think that must mean something. You see how fast Etienne came out? He must be very angry at the fact that his family has lost land. Now he'll never come back, Matt thought. He slowly was turning over the pages. He had never questioned the story. Like Robinson Crusoe, he had thought it natural and right that the wild man should be the white man's slave. Was there perhaps another possibility? The thought was new and troubling. I love this. I love this because it is so honest. It is so real that until we're shown that maybe some of our actions are cruel or like bullies or racist, that we need to be told that so that we can learn from our mistakes, that it's okay to not realize it. But then when you do realize it, if you keep acting that way, then that shows that you actually feel that or you believe that. But in this case, right now, Etienne has stomped off, and I'm wondering how he feels about Matt, whether or not he feels that Matt feels the same way. But I also really love how Matt stops and is thinking. He's a character on pages, but at this point, he's realizing, gosh, I never thought about it that way. Sometimes we have to do that, think about things another way. Chapter 10. He felt weak with relief when next morning Etienne walked stiffly into the cabin and sat down at the table. Stumbling over himself, he set about the lesson. As soon as he could, he picked up Robinson Crusoe. In the night, he had carefully thought out just what he was going to say, if Etienne ever gave him another chance. Now, he had to talk fast, because he could see that Etienne was set against hearing any more of this book. "Let me go on," he pleaded. It's different from now on. Friday, that's what Robinson Crusoe names him, doesn't kneel anymore. Not slave. No, Matt lied. Matt lied. No, Matt lied. After they get to be, well, companions. They share everything together. Ignoring the suspicion on Etienne's face, Matt began to hurriedly read. He was thankful that he knew the book so well that he was able to see when trouble might be coming. One of the first words Crusoe taught his man Friday was the word master. Luckily, Matt caught that in time, and it was true. Crusoe and his companion did go about together, sharing their adventures, only Matt thought it would have been better, perhaps, if Friday hadn't been quite so thick-headed. Idiom. Thick-headed. Not very smart. Kind of like Miggery Sal from our last book. After all, there must have been a thing or two about the desert island that a native who had lived there all his life could have taught Robinson Crusoe. When Matt closed the book, Etienne nodded. Then, as so many times before, he took Matt by surprise. "You like go fish?" he asked. "I sure would," Matt said gratefully. Stopping to pick up his fish pole from beside the door, he ran to overtake the Indian boy, who strode on ahead. He knew his grin was stretching from one ear to the other, but he couldn't hide his feelings as Etienne did. They walked some distance, Matt managing to keep pace with the Indian's swift stride. Determined not to let Etienne know that his ankle was aching, they seemed to be following no particular trail. Finally, they came out on a part of the creek that Matt had not seen before. It was shallow here, studded with rocks and pebbles, so that the water rippling over them made little rapids or collected in quiet pools. Here Etienne stopped, broke off a sapling, and instead of making a fish pole, drew his knife from his pouch and quickly shaved a sharp point, making a spear. Then he stepped gently into the stream. Matt stopped and stood watching. Etienne stood motionless, peering intently into a pool of clear water. All at once he stooped, darted his spear with one quick stroke, and came up with a glittering fish. He studied it for a moment. Too small, he decided. To Matt's astonishment, he spoke to the fish quite solemnly. A few incomprehensible words, then tossed it back into the stream. In a few moments, he had speared another, which he judged large enough to keep. "Do same," he ordered now. Coming back to the bank, he handed Matt the spear. He would just look ridiculous, Matt knew before he started. He waded in and stood up to his knees, looking down in the sliding water. Presently, a fish darted past. At least he thought it was a fish. It was hard to tell which was the shadow and which might be a fish. At any rate, it was gone before he got the spear into the water. Presently, he saw another, this one quite definitely a fish, calmly drifting in the pool. He jabbed at it hopelessly. He was sure his stick actually touched the slippery thing. He lunged at it, lost his footing, and went down with a splash that would scare off any fish for miles around. Then he came up dripping. He saw Etienne watching him with a horrid grin. Suddenly, he felt hot in spite of the icy water. Why had Etienne brought him out here anyway? Had Etienne just wanted to show off his own cleverness and to make Matt look more clumsy than ever? Was this Etienne's answer, in case Matt had any idea in his head about being a Robinson Crusoe? For a moment, Matt glared back at Etienne with a scowl as black as any Indian's. Then he wiped his nose with the back of his hand and sloshed back to the bank. He snatched up his own pole in line. He poked up about under the wet leaves and found a good juicy worm and fitted it onto his hook. "I'll do it my way," he said. "I can catch plenty of fish with this, and that's what matters." Etienne sat on the bank and watched. To Matt's satisfaction, in no time there was a long, hard tug on the line, a strong one. An impressive-looking fish rose to the surface, thrashing fiercely. Matt gave a jerk, and the line came swinging out of the water so suddenly that he almost lost his footing again. It was empty. "Fish broke line," Etienne observed. As if anyone couldn't see that. Furious at Etienne, at the fish, and at himself, Matt examined the break, unable to face the Indian. He had lost more than a good fish. His hook had disappeared as well, the only hook that Matt had. Of course, Etienne noticed. Those black eyes never missed anything. "Make new hook," he said. Without even getting to his feet, he reached out, broke a twig off of a maple sapling, came out came the crooked knife again. In a few strokes, he cut a piece as long as his little finger, carved a groove around the middle, and whittled both ends into sharp points. So he's got a little bit of a groove right about where my knuckle is. You see how my brain does this? And then he said, sharpen the two sides to very strict point. So these are really pointy, and this is really pointy. And so you've got a little place to hook, and then you've got two sharp ends. Let's find out what happens. Now he stepped into the water and tied Matt's line expertly around the groove in the center of it. He put on two worms, he said. Cover up all hook. He didn't offer to find the worms. Matt had lost all interest in fishing. He knew that somehow or other he would just provide more amusement for Etienne, but he couldn't refuse. He didn't have to wait long before another fish caught hold. This time he landed it neatly. Good, said Etienne from the bank. Big. Matt was trying to get it off the line. He swallowed the whole hook, he said. Better white man's hook, Etienne said. Turn around inside fish. Never get away. Back on the bank, Matt slit the fish and extracted the hook and his line. But the thin twig had broken in half. Easy, make new hook, Etienne said. Make many hooks. Of course, looking down at the simple thing in his hand, Matt realized that he never again would need to worry about losing his hook. He could make a new one wherever he happened to be. It was another necessary thing that Etienne had shown him, just as he had made the snare. He wasn't sure why Etienne had bothered, but grudgingly, he had to admit that Etienne had proved to him once again that he didn't always have to depend on white man's tools. All at once, Matt was hungry. The sun was straight overhead, and it would be a long tramp back through the woods before he could cook his fish. Now he saw that Etienne had the same thought. The Indian was heaping up a small pile of pine needles and grass. He drew from his muskrat skin pouch a piece of hard stone with bits of quartz embedded in it. Striking it with his knife, he soon had a spark, which he blew into a flame. I could have done that myself, Matt thought. In fact, he had done it many a time, but he had not realized that he could use a common stone as well as his flint. Get fish ready, Etienne ordered now, pointing to the two fish on the bank. Matt did not like his masterful tone, but he did as he was told. By the time he had the two fish split and gutted and washed in the creek, Etienne had a fire blazing. Matt was curious to see how he would go about the cooking. He watched as Etienne cut two short branches, bending them first to make sure that they were green. He trimmed and sharpened them rapidly. Then he thrusted a pointed end into each fish from the head to the tail. A small green stick set crosswise inside the fish to hold the sides apart so that they would cook well over the fire. He handed one stick to Matt. One on each side of the fire, the two boys squatted and held their sticks to the blaze. From time to time, Etienne fed the fire with dry twigs. When the flesh was crisp and brown, they ate, still silent. Matt licked his fingers. His resentment had completely vanished along with his hunger. Golly, he said, that might have been the best fish I've ever eaten. Good, said Etienne. Across the fire, he looked at Matt, and his eyes gleamed. He was laughing again, but somehow not with scorn. What did you say to that fish you threw back? Matt was still curious. Do you remember when Etienne caught the two small fish, and then he whispered something to it and then put it back in the water? Matt is wondering, what did you say to that fish you threw back? Matt was still curious. I say to him not to tell other fish, Etienne said seriously. Not scare away. You actually think a fish can understand? Etienne shrugged. Fish know many a thing, he replied. Matt sat pondering this strange idea. Well, it seemed to work, he said finally. At least the other fish came along. A wide grin spread slowly across Etienne's face. It was the first time Matt had seen him smile. I love this. I love that we start out with Etienne realizing that he has different beliefs than Robinson Crusoe's author. That just because somebody of color is a little bit different and wild in comparison, that they don't have to be slaves. Did you notice that now we're no longer just learning English? We're learning what it's like to live in the forest, but we're learning how to live it the way that Etienne's family and Etienne's people have done it. So we have, in one chapter, learned how to snare animals. We have learned how to make a kind of a spear for fish, but it seems like Matt's going to need some time to practice that. We've also learned how to make fish hooks because Matt was dependent on going out and buying fish hooks and having those metal fish hooks, probably a lot like you and I. But the reality is that he now is capable, because of what Etienne has taught him, to never run out of fish hooks. That's pretty amazing. We also learned a little bit more about native culture. We learned that there is a respect when you take from the ocean. There's a respect when you take from the land. There is a respect of thank yous. And that's a really big deal, right? Huge deal. And so as we go through this beautiful, beautiful piece of reading, I think that that's a really good place to end our first week. We've had 3 days. We've been introduced to grandfather and why he wants Etienne to learn. We understand why Matt's alone in the woods. We know that Matt needs the tricks that Etienne has. So it is at this point that I will tell you, next week, I need to make some announcements really quickly. So what's going to happen next week is this. Miss Rainey and I are going on an adventure. And that means that I'm not always going to be in the same place at 3:30 every day. And so what I'm going to do is this. Every day at 3:30, I will make sure that the next set of readings is put into place. My expectation is that you guys keep coming back and participating. Use the comment section to have conversations. Please enjoy it just like we've been doing together. I don't want to miss a single time with this. So I will be reading. I will be uploading when I'm unavailable. But every once in a while at that 3:30 time, I promise I will show up and I will be live and I'll be someplace else. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, until we are together again, you know how much I love you. You know how much I hope for you to be safe and wonderful. Go out and explore like the Native Americans do and see what kind of life you can create. I love you. Have a great weekend. Get out of here. Hi, Jen.